On 16 October 1941, as dawn broke over Moscow, Joseph Stalin stood alone near the Kremlin windows, listening to distant artillery. Stalin's hands trembled slightly beneath his coat, not from fear alone, but from certainty that this city carried the fate of an entire world. German armies were less than 30 miles away, their engines growling through frozen fields, while Soviet defenses collapsed day by day. Inside the Kremlin, generals gathered around maps soaked with sweat and ink, whispering evacuation plans, waiting for Stalin to speak. Georgy Zhukov stood among them, boots still dusty from the front, knowing Moscow could fall, yet believing retreat would kill the war. The question hanging in that room was brutal and simple: abandon the capital or stand and bleed. And Stalin understood both costs. Around him, advisors remembered Napoleon's march and Moscow's burning past, history screaming warnings as winter closed in. Trains were already prepared beyond the city, factories dismantled under cover of night, and ministers expected orders to flee east. When the evacuation proposal reached Stalin, silence followed his reading, a silence heavy enough to crush hope. He lifted his eyes slowly, meeting each general's gaze in turn, measuring loyalty, fear, and resolve. What Stalin said next would shock Soviet command, redefine courage under dictatorship, and decide whether Moscow lived or died. Beyond those walls, millions waited unaware. Soldiers dug trenches in ice, civilians prayed, and the world held its breath. This was the moment before refusal, before defiance hardened into policy, and before Soviet generals learned they would stay. On 17 October 1941, the Kremlin conference room felt colder, as Stalin finally answered the evacuation question. He spoke quietly, deliberately, with a firmness that silenced every shuffle of paper and breath. Stalin declared Moscow would not be abandoned. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. While the Red Army still stood, several generals stiffened instantly, realizing retreat plans were dead, and survival now meant resistance alone. Zhukov felt a surge of grim relief, mixed with dread, knowing defense was possible, but victory uncertain. Others, like Shaposhnikov, understood the political weight, because losing Moscow meant losing legitimacy itself. Stalin reminded them the world was watching. Berlin was watching, and fear would spread faster than tanks. He insisted that panic was the true enemy, more dangerous than Guderian's panzers or Luftwaffe bombs. Outside the Kremlin, rumors of evacuation already stirred chaos. Families fled streets, and confidence cracked everywhere. Stalin ordered those rumors crushed. Newspapers rewritten, radios silenced, and commanders sent back to the lines. Factories would stay operational, workers would remain, and the capital would become a fortress of steel and ice. Zhukov was given full authority to organize defense. No excuses allowed, no withdrawals without permission. That authority came with an unspoken threat. Failure meant disgrace, arrest, or disappearance into history's shadows. Soviet generals left the room knowing survival depended on obedience, endurance, and unimaginable sacrifice. That night, Stalin refused to leave the Kremlin, choosing presence over safety, symbolism over escape. His decision hardened morale, not with hope, but with inevitability. Moscow would fight because it must. Beyond the city, German commanders underestimated this resolve, believing collapse was only days away. They did not yet understand. The refusal to evacuate had transformed Moscow into a psychological battlefield. On 19 October 1941, Moscow entered a state of siege, and the city felt its pulse slow. Barricades rose across boulevards, trenches scarred parks, and anti-tank obstacles cut through neighborhoods. Zhukov moved relentlessly between command posts, reading reports by candlelight, calculating minutes and lives. Soviet generals now spoke openly of annihilation, yet none dared suggest retreat again. They understood Stalin's refusal was irreversible, and Moscow had become a line drawn in blood. Inside underground bunkers, officers argued over divisions that barely existed. Units shattered but unbroken. Fresh recruits arrived from Siberia. Faces unreadable, boots crunching snow. Carrying rumors of winter salvation. Stalin approved their deployment carefully, waiting for frost to weaken German engines and morale. Every hour mattered, every delay bought by sacrifice. As frontline commanders begged for ammunition. Civilian militias trained with ancient rifles. Factory workers learned to throw grenades, students dug defenses. The generals watched this transformation silently, knowing Moscow's people were now part of the strategy. German artillery thundered closer. Shells landing in suburbs, smoke rising like dark omens. Reports reached Zhukov describing enemy exhaustion, fuel shortages, and stalled advances. Hope appeared quietly. Not as confidence, but as calculation. Winter was becoming an ally. Stalin demanded constant updates, often late at night, questioning numbers with ruthless precision. He praised no one, threatened many, and expected results regardless of cost. The generals felt trapped between German guns and Stalin's will. Yet resolve hardened. They no longer debated survival, only how long they could hold. As snow thickened, German momentum slowed, and Moscow still stood. On 24 October 1941, the first heavy snow fell over Moscow, muting explosions and hiding graves. Soviet generals gathered reports showing German columns stalled, engines freezing, supply lines stretched to breaking. Zhukov recognized the shift immediately, sensing time had begun to fight on their side. Yet relief never reached their faces, because holding ground still demanded endless sacrifice. Stalin summoned commanders again, his tone sharp, his patience thinner than the winter air. He demanded proof that Moscow's refusal was justified. Not through words, but through results. Generals spoke carefully, describing counterattacks near Volokholamsk and stubborn defenses along the Mozhaisk line. Each success was small, costly, and fragile. But together they formed resistance impossible to ignore. Outside, civilians froze in queues. Air raid sirens wailed, and churches filled with whispered prayers. The city had not evacuated, but it had transformed, becoming a fortress of endurance. German commanders now reported unexpected Soviet aggression. Attacks launched despite terrible losses. They underestimated Stalin's gamble, failing to grasp how symbolism fueled Soviet resistance. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin marked positions with a blue pencil, already thinking beyond defense. He spoke of counteroffensives cautiously, testing reactions, watching confidence return to exhausted faces. Zhukov understood the implication instantly. Moscow might not only survive, but strike back. The generals exchanged glances, realizing refusal had changed the war's rhythm. Winter deepened, German morale cracked, and Moscow's survival became undeniable fact. Still, Stalin warned them victory was not mercy, and failure would never be forgiven. This tension shaped every order, every assault, and every frozen night ahead. The refusal to evacuate had evolved, from defiance into strategy, from desperation into momentum. On 5 December 1941, the silence before dawn felt heavier than artillery. As Soviet lines prepared to move, Zhukov stood over fresh maps, knowing defense had ended, and history demanded an answer. Stalin's refusal now reached its final test. Whether Moscow could push back, not merely endure. At first light, Soviet artillery erupted, tearing into frozen German positions across the front. Generals listened to radio reports with disbelief. Units advancing, enemies retreating, momentum reversing. German soldiers stumbled through snow, equipment failing, confidence collapsing under unexpected pressure. Zhukov pressed forward relentlessly, ordering attacks despite exhaustion, sensing opportunity would not return. Stalin received updates without celebration, absorbing success with cold satisfaction. He reminded his generals this victory was fragile, and arrogance had destroyed empires before. Civilians heard distant thunder and realized the city was fighting outward, not inward. Factories continued producing shells, workers collapsing at machines, driven by survival alone. German command struggled to explain defeat, blaming weather, ignoring Soviet resolve. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin allowed himself one private acknowledgement. Refusal had worked. Yet he also understood the cost: tens of thousands dead, fields soaked with blood. Generals spoke quietly now. No longer questioning evacuation, only planning pursuit. The Red Army advanced mile by mile, reclaiming villages, pushing fear westward. Moscow still stood, scarred but unbroken, its survival echoing across the world. The decision not to flee had transformed defeat into defiance, and defiance into momentum. Stalin's gamble reshaped the war's narrative, proving even tyranny could inspire resistance. As snowstorms swallowed the battlefield, Moscow's counteroffensive marked a turning point. On 12 December 1941, Soviet generals assessed the battlefield. Surrounded by maps littered with red arrows, the counteroffensive exceeded expectations. Yet exhaustion threatened to unravel hard-won gains. Zhukov warned Stalin cautiously that overextension could destroy momentum just as quickly. Stalin listened in silence, weighing ambition against survival, power against prudence. He approved continued advances, but demanded discipline. No reckless charges, no symbolic victories. German forces reeled backward, abandoning equipment, leaving frozen dead along retreat routes. Soviet officers recorded disbelief in their diaries. The invincible enemy was running. Yet supply shortages haunted every advance. Ammunition thin, soldiers starving, boots falling apart. Generals argued quietly over priorities: defend Moscow's perimeter or chase retreating Germans. Stalin insisted Moscow's safety came first, memory of October still sharp. He reminded them failure would erase December's triumph, and history would show no mercy. Beyond strategy, fear lingered in every order: fear of reversal, fear of blame. Civilians returned cautiously to streets, counting buildings, burying bodies, salvaging normal life. Foreign observers began to grasp the shift. Moscow had survived, Germany had stalled. Stalin allowed propaganda to breathe. Newspapers praising endurance, radio voices steady again. The generals understood image mattered now, victory had to be seen as inevitable. Yet winter remained brutal, killing men without discrimination or heroism. Each mile gained demanded lives, and Stalin accepted this arithmetic without hesitation. The refusal to evacuate had reshaped command culture, obedience welded to survival. As December deepened, Soviet leadership prepared for a longer, bloodier war. On 29 December 1941, Moscow breathed cautiously as front lines stabilized further west. Soviet generals now spoke with confidence, yet fear still shaped every conversation. They understood survival had been won, but victory remained distant and unforgiving. Stalin reviewed reports late into the night, measuring success against political necessity. He praised the army publicly, while privately reminding commanders of October's brink. Zhukov reflected on those early days, when refusal felt like a death sentence. Now it appeared as calculated defiance, transforming weakness into psychological dominance. German commanders regrouped desperately, issuing orders to hold ground at any cost. Soviet intelligence intercepted those messages, confirming enemy morale was fractured. Stalin approved limited pauses, allowing troops to regroup, wounds to heal slightly. Generals welcomed the restraint, knowing winter victories could not last forever. Moscow's civilians slowly reclaimed routines, markets reopened, trams returned, hope flickered. Yet scars remained everywhere. Shattered buildings, missing families, silent streets at dusk. The generals recognized Moscow had become a symbol, not just a city. Its survival emboldened resistance across occupied Europe, altering global perceptions. Stalin exploited this relentlessly, presenting himself as unmovable, inevitable, eternal. The refusal to evacuate now justified his authority, silencing critics and rivals. Within the Red Army, loyalty hardened, fueled by shared suffering and survival. As the year ended, Soviet command prepared for prolonged struggle. The war had changed shape, but its cruelty remained absolute. On 15 January 1942 Soviet headquarters faced a dangerous question. How far could success be pushed? Generals gathered again, confident but wary, haunted by memories of near collapse. Zhukov argued for caution, stressing supply limits, exhausted men, and fragile lines. Others urged aggression, believing German weakness might never be greater. Stalin listened intently, weighing military logic against political momentum. He believed retreating now could revive fear, undoing October's psychological victory. Orders followed that blended restraint with pressure. Advances continued, but objectives narrowed. Soviet forces pushed westward slowly, encountering stiffening German resistance. The enemy adapted, fortifying villages, digging deep, refusing easy collapse. Losses mounted again, reminding commanders victory carried no mercy. Stalin monitored every kilometer gained, demanding explanations for every pause. Generals felt pressure tighten, success had raised expectations beyond human limits. Civilians sensed the war moving away, yet air raids still haunted nights. Propaganda celebrated Moscow's defiance, turning refusal into legend. Foreign allies took notice, recognizing the Red Army as resilient, not broken. The generals understood the narrative had shifted permanently. What began as desperation had evolved into doctrine: never retreat, never yield. Stalin embraced this identity fully, shaping future campaigns with Moscow in mind. Yet beneath confidence, fear lingered, memory of October never faded. The refusal to evacuate became a rule, not an exception. On 3 March 1942 the Moscow front settled into uneasy balance. Victory and exhaustion intertwined. Soviet generals reviewed casualty lists silently, numbers too large to speak aloud. They understood the refusal to evacuate had saved the capital, but consumed generations. Stalin showed little emotion, studying losses as necessary expenditure. He reminded commanders the war was far from finished, and mercy had no place. German forces stabilized their lines, adapting to winter and Soviet pressure. The dream of total collapse faded, replaced by grinding attrition. Zhukov warned that repeating Moscow's gamble elsewhere could invite disaster. Stalin listened, yet his faith in defiance had hardened. He believed resolve itself was a weapon, capable of bending reality. Generals now framed plans around symbolism as much as terrain. Cities became prizes, not only for logistics, but for morale. The memory of October shaped every decision, retreat equated with weakness. Officers feared failure more than death, knowing Stalin's judgment was absolute. Moscow's survival echoed through orders issued across the front. Civilians slowly rebuilt lives, carrying trauma beneath outward calm. The world saw the Soviet Union differently now. No longer collapsing, but enduring. Stalin's refusal had rewritten expectations, inside and outside his borders. Yet the cost remained unpaid, haunting every village and family. As spring approached, new offensives loomed, shaped by Moscow's lesson. On 9 April 1942 Soviet leadership reflected quietly. As winter finally loosened its grip, Moscow stood alive, battered yet defiant. Its survival etched into collective memory. Generals understood the refusal to evacuate had changed the war's direction permanently. Stalin saw something deeper, a precedent of power forged through immobility. He believed leaders must anchor nations, not flee with them. This belief would shape future battles. Sometimes inspiring resistance, sometimes demanding impossible sacrifice. Zhukov carried Moscow's lesson into every campaign, balancing caution against expectation. Other commanders remembered October as a warning. Courage could not replace logistics forever. Stalin ignored such nuance, favoring will over probability. The city's survival became legend, repeated in speeches, films, and textbooks. Yet beneath myth lay fear, hunger, and uncounted graves. The refusal hardened Soviet identity, endurance above life, victory above cost. Foreign observers recognized Moscow as the first crack in German inevitability. It proved the Reich could be stopped, if paid for in blood. Stalin's decision cemented his authority, silencing doubt through survival. Generals learned loyalty was survival, and hesitation meant erasure. The world moved forward, carrying Moscow's echo into every front. This moment defined Soviet war doctrine: never surrender the symbol. Moscow did not evacuate, and history never forgot the price. What Soviet generals said that day mattered, but what they endured defined the war.